Exactly. So this CFO, I think it was, so a senior individual was having a telephone conversation, so he was having a Teams meeting with his finance team, and the finance team told him that he had to urgently transfer £20 million to the new account. He questioned a bit, but he was obviously having a video conversation with Catherine and Dan, and they said, yeah, you've got to transfer the money, CEO's told us, I'm paraphrasing slightly, and of course, he's speaking face to face with the individual, so he does what he needs to do, and the £20 million goes missing. So, we all think, how would you even spot that? Surely you would recognise that you're speaking to an artificial intelligence or a deep fake. But I'm hopefully going to have myself introduce myself, if this works.
大家好，欢迎光临，感谢大家的到来。今天我想向大家介绍一下人工智能为我们所有人带来的机遇。Salutations et bienvenue, merci à tous d'être ici. Aujourd'hui, je voulais vous parler un peu des opportunités, des menaces et des défis que l'intelligence artificielle pose pour nous tous, notamment dans le domaine de la détection et de la prévention de la fraude dans nos entreprises. Alors commençons.
Me speaking French, and as you heard, me speaking in Chinese as well. So speaking multiple languages, I think I speak Hindi and German as well at some point. But obviously I don't speak any of these languages.
感谢大家的到来。今天我想向大家介绍一下人工智能为我们所有人带来的机遇、威胁和挑战，特别是在检测和预防企业中的欺诈方面。那么，让我们开始吧。
I think we were talking about translation tools a little bit earlier over Prosecco, but we were saying that these technologies are fantastic. You've seen these tools before. I think this is 11 voices or something like this. I uploaded about 2 minutes of my speech, so I was just introducing myself, speaking hopefully English, and it spat out Hindu, French, German, speaking multiple other languages, and it means that you can be present anywhere in the world speaking the native language. What I found quite fascinating is it gets my intonation. If you upload enough of it, which is only a couple of minutes, in seconds it spits back your ability to be able to speak in any language. So you can introduce yourself around the world, but it catches your intonations, it catches your mannerisms, catches your facial movements. And I think it's a fantastic way to deep fake yourself, and I can't tell that this isn't me speaking, and hopefully it's convincing enough. But when you think about the Arab £20 million going missing, it went missing because it was so plausible. And so at that point, I'm going to introduce myself and tell you I'm Vijay Rathour. I lead cyber and digital investigations at Grant Thornton. It's a big team, but it does everything it says on the tin, cyber and digital investigations. In my first careers, I'm a barrister and a solicitor, so I was a practicing lawyer for quite a while. I also worked at the FCA, so I was doing regulatory enforcement investigations. But in my spare time, I was a hacker, and I would go home and I would hack into organisations and hopefully not do very naughty things. And at the right time, I found the opportunity to find a career that suits me well, which is cyber and digital investigations. So I help keep organisations safe. I hack into them. I tell them how we hacked into them, and then I tell them how not to get hacked into. But then I also do a lot of work around artificial intelligence and technology to improve the skills of the digital investigator and hopefully make sure that we can bring a hybrid solution to both technology and investigations. So I'm going to try and go through a few different things today. How technology is in enabling new types of frauds, so the kind of things that we're seeing when you're especially seeing technology-enabled fraud typologies. A few case studies, a few techniques to try and reduce risk and identify challenges and consideration around AI, a lot of that we've already heard about, and potentially future trends as well. But actually, my presentation is really boring, right? I'm going to try and skip through a lot of it because we've already seen many of these things, and it's also a bit dry, and it's the graveyard shift. But can I encourage you to ask questions as we go? I would much prefer that you just put your hand up and say, Vijay, that's bollocks. Put your hands up, ask me something as we go. I mean, the question about the singularity, I fully disagree with. I don't know that we necessarily deserve to be around if computers get better than us, but that's just an evolutionary trait. That's what's happened before. But ask questions, let's be topical, and hopefully I can keep you awake until the food arrives, which is imminent. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the evolving fraud framework and landscape that we're operating in. I think you're mostly compliance professionals, aren't you? Are you also involved in investigations? Do you get involved in, I think we were talking about whistleblowing with one of the ladies earlier, talking about some of the compliance platforms that we're having to deal with as well, obviously, while we're here by our wonderful host from EQS. From our perspective, we're seeing a dramatic increase in technology-enabled fraud. I mean, inevitably, as we're all going to. So these are just some statistics that we're kind of seeing represented on the screen. in the UK, we're seeing something like £1.17 billion worth of fraud being committed every year. That's growing. It did actually drop slightly in 2022. That's probably a knock-over from COVID and a few increases in internal observations around the way people were performing over the last few years. But actually, cyber-enabled, especially cyber-enabled fraud, is on the increase year on year. And one of the largest aspects of that is obviously internal fraud, so effectively seeing organisations and insider criminality of one form or the other. A lot of the work that I get involved in is international ABAC, so anti-bribery, corruption, fraud, white-collar crime, but also thinking about, we were talking a little bit earlier about market manipulation, also talking about rogue traders and people invariably trying to get around the governance and compliance systems that we're building, and they're finding typically technologically or indeed even very simplistic ways to get around those guardrails that we put around them in order to be able to do the naughty things that they're doing. I think there was an observation that you were making a little bit earlier that we don't know what the best criminals look like, because obviously by design they don't get caught. So the people that we do know that are failed criminals are typically the typologies and the methodologies that we learn about. The best hackers don't get caught, the best criminals don't get caught. So inevitably we're kind of looking retrospectively at the technologies and approaches that they've used. But we are trying to extrapolate those forward and find ways to work around them and preempt those types of technologically and innovative forms of crime that are developing. And so I'm going to try and talk a little bit about how some of these are evolving, but it's becoming increasingly challenging to stay on the cutting edge of what's really coming down the pipe. A lot of the work that I do is around things like cryptocurrencies, potentially people stealing funds through the back door, getting around compliance systems and Four Eyes protocols, and being able to do naughty things with money and take intellectual property, give it to a competitor, or just even basic things like redirect funds. One of the most significant forms of fraud at the moment is business email compromise. It's very, very simple to do, but I send an email to Jonathan, except it's not coming from grantthornton.co.uk, but it's coming from grantthornton.cz. And what's the likelihood he's actually going to spot that it's a fake email? And hundreds of millions of pounds are being redirected on that basis. I think, unfortunately, as a result of that, we think that all crime is super sophisticated, but so much of it isn't. So much of it is actually so easily catchable. It is so easily detectable if we know what we're looking for. But unfortunately, the technology is certainly making it harder for us to stay on top of the evolving fraud and criminal landscape. So the bad guys certainly are evolving and they're staying ahead of the game. They are invariably using our own human defences against us. I think there's a fantastic book by a chap called Kevin Mitnick on social engineering, but effectively the art of hacking humans. So being able to manipulate human psychology in order to be able to commit internal crimes, or indeed any kind of crime. We're seeing that significantly operationalized, systematized. So you can do hacking as a service, you can get fraud as a service, you can get money laundering as a service, all online, are all effectively untraceable. And so these types of technologies, such as Bitcoin, such as AI, has dramatically decreased the barriers to entry to become a sophisticated fraudster and criminal. And unfortunately, it means that our job means that we've got to constantly stay on the alert, and we're constantly evolving the technologies and approaches that we have to develop in order to be able to catch those criminals. I was going to say guys, but it's not all naughty men. Are you familiar with things like rug pulls and romance scams? You must be. You look like the type of man who is Christian.
Suckered loads of time.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, romance scams are exactly what they say on the tin. It's going to be a beautiful woman takes a man out and then seduces him, in theory, and then finds ways to get money out of him. That game is pretty much the second oldest profession, except these days it is significantly more technologically empowered. You're on Tinder, you're being catfished, you're sending people money, except it becomes significantly more operationalized, and it's going up geometrically in terms of the amount of money that you can get out of people. And these days, the bad guys are only trying to get access to your identity, they're only trying to get access to your passwords, because then the opportunity is to dramatically broaden the attack surface of getting into your organization, getting access to your data, your databases, sell that on to the North Koreans or wherever else they need to. And so, although some of these look fairly mundane, any entry point is a way to get inside your business and do naughty things with it, or indeed get things out of your business. At the moment, I'm investigating a theft effectively. So a crypto exchange that we're working with found that it had £65 million stolen from its bank accounts, but they didn't realise. So effectively, one of their customers had to come up to them and say, "Okay, there's no money in my wallet. Do you mind telling me where my money's gone?" The exchange had to do an internal investigation, and obviously the money had gone missing, so it had to immediately compensate £65 million. So it's lost 65 million. It's compensated 65 million. It had a regulatory fine for pretty much the same amount, so it's cost them in the region of 180. But this was all facilitated by an insider inside the business. So extremely sophisticated, but all from an insider. So this guy knew the systems inside and out. It was very Ocean's 11, but he was able to manipulate the systems and get the money out of the business and do fantastic things with it. And you think it's basic stuff. You should be watching the staff that you've got inside your business. You should make sure that you're controlling them. You should make sure that there are 4 eyes, etc., etc. But as Christian was saying, is 4 eyes enough? Is 6 eyes enough? At what point are you controlling your team enough to be able to capture these types of aberrant behaviours? You've got evolving technologies like vishing and phishing, schmishing. Everybody heard of vishing? Yeah. Good stuff. Schmishing. They keep making up these horrible expressions. I don't even know why they keep on making such horrible acronyms, but effectively it just means people hacking you through text messages. WhatsApp we've got these days, we've got Teams. We all admit these days that there's probably 8 different ways of communicating with anybody inside the business at this point, but every one of those is an opportunity to get slightly frazzled, to get slightly confused about, is this definitely Catherine or is this the other Catherine? But every one of those is an opportunity for somebody to socially engineer you or take advantage of the fact that you're slightly under pressure and not necessarily reading every email or every message, and therefore that's an entry point in order to be able to work around the systems, the government's data loss prevention systems, fraud and anomaly detection systems. And again, I think Christian and I worked on a rogue trader investigation at some point when the individual stole several billion, didn't he? And managed to get away with several billion by being able to understand what the compliance systems inside the business look like, being able to manipulate those on the back end, and being able to find ways to get around the governance that was put into place. Those are not nice, but obviously they can result in absolutely monumental amounts of damage being suffered by the organisations, and obviously all of us as potential customers of those organisations. So we've got a massively evolving fraud landscape. Individuals are suffering as a result of that. Businesses are suffering. Typically, those costs are being passed on to us as customers. Regulatory fines are increasing. I think we found actually that the FCA and the SFO, the Serious Fraud Office, is conducting less investigations, but when it is doing so, it's doing so significantly more technically robustly. So it knows what it's after. It's really ripping apart governance systems. It's going into these and asking all of the horrible questions. And it means that you really got to be ahead of your game in terms of making sure that you were fit for purpose, you were defensible, and you understood what was going on inside your organisation. If you don't have mitigations in place like an EQS, you're obviously going to be in trouble if you just say, well, it could happen to anybody, couldn't it? That's not the best answer to have. So we'll talk a little bit about why this is an evolving problem, but also an evolving toolkit that is potentially available. Obviously, many of us are using platforms like EQS, but as risk professionals, as those in governance and compliance, I think you've got that moving feast. The technology is moving, the ability to be able to evolve the way that you want to commit frauds is evolving at the same time, probably ahead of all of us. That we're talking about how this is a full-time job, you've got compliance jobs, you've got a day job that means that just keeping the lights on is hard enough. Is it your day job to go off and figure out what phishing is in crypto and distributed ledger and AI and Flux and everything else? Well, it's somebody's job. And ironically, I think we've got the ability to use AI back on itself. So increasingly, we're using technology, we're using AI and systems like that to empower what I would call a better human, a hybrid investigator, a hybrid compliance professional, to be able to identify those problems earlier. And I'm going to kind of go through a few examples of how we're using those types of technologies and where we see them coming into play by both the good guys and the bad guys. But as you can imagine, I think we're talking about your last question. I don't think anybody answered it, but I think they should have done. What is there that a human has done which a technology couldn't? And I was going to say make babies, but at some point they'll be able to do that as well, right? At some point the AI can do everything. I had a bit of an argument with one of my colleagues, and she was saying, yes, but the AI's got no soul. And I was saying, does it really matter? Because with all due respect, a system like ChatGPT or Claude has read everything a human has ever generated. But with all due respect, have you? And it's perfectly understandable that a system like a ChatGPT or a Claude is more technically understandable. It's more technically robust about understanding things that humans have generated. Doesn't mean that it can necessarily be innovative, but it can certainly understand humans well, because it's certainly been trained on a lot of that stuff. We can turn that back on itself, and I'll talk about a few fraud detection mechanisms that are being generated as a result of systems like that. But from my perspective, I think the thesis should be, how can we use technology to try to detect more fraud better? So detect those compliance aberrations, detect those that are trying to work around systems and the safeguards that we put in place better. How can we increase the efficiency of being able to investigate those to the degree that you need to? So how do you increase efficiency and accuracy if you've got to look into those types of problems? And then ultimately, we want to empower the investigator to be more robust, so that you can create, we're having a debate about social justice, effectively create a mechanism where you have a symbiotic relationship that good governance creates better people to govern. If you allow, I think we were talking about whistleblowing problems a little bit earlier with one of the attendees, but if you allow problems to fester inside an organisation, obviously the governance starts to break down, staff start to lose confidence that the organisation knows what's going on, which means that somebody else will probably do something naughty as well. An investigation I was involved in for a Japanese bank, the general manager was known to be stealing chairs from the kitchen. He was stealing artwork off the walls and selling it on eBay. But they had a rolling program of managers coming in from Japan only for 3 months. So they would get trained up in the UK, learn what the UK environment was like, and then go back to Japan, and somebody else would come over. And so as a result of that, every general manager was basically saying, every manager that was coming in from Japan was saying, not really my problem. I'm gone in 2 months, so it'll be somebody else's problem. As a result of that, there was a complete breakdown in confidence in the governance of the business, because everybody thought, well, if the general manager can get away with it, why not me? So again, it kind of creates that festering problem that if you aren't seen to be doing justice, then effectively organisations can start to fall down and everybody can start to lower their own standards. A little bit of self-aggrandizing effectively. Grant Thornton was recently involved in a few investigations, so I'm not sure if anybody would have read this, and no reason why you should have done that. The Church of England at some point during the Black Lives Matter kind of furore decided to say, I wonder if we were ever involved in any slave trading, which kind of seems like a bit of an obvious question and answer. But they asked themselves if they were ever involved in the slave trade. So Grant Thornton got involved and effectively had to re-audit the Church of England, going all the way back to date dot. So we had to go out and get vellum and pieces of parchment out of libraries in Oxford and effectively re-audit the entire Church of England. And obviously you find that there are governance failures, and you find that they're involved in the slave trade, and you find that they were moving funds around and doing lots and lots and lots of naughty things. And at some point the Church of England said, can you stop investigating it, because you don't like what you're invested in hiding. But at that point, what was the expression, the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back in the bottle, so we continue to investigate at their expense, because you had to. But it's fascinating that obviously organisations like that, you can systematise and you can allow failures in governance, which what obviously looks like failures in objective governance to become embedded. Again, we were talking about manipulation, market manipulation of interest rates and the LIBOR investigation and so on. This stuff happens. And you would think that a compliance and a governance system would catch it, but does it? I think everybody will be familiar with the Horizon scandal at the moment with the Post Office. We're involved in a similar problem for a similar organisation that is magnitudes bigger than this. But one would think, why has it not been spotted earlier? And effectively, the thinking in it at the moment is, this was one problem. We know that inside that organisation, this was being identified 1,000 times a week. So the problem is 1,000 times bigger than what they've currently spoken about. But these problems go systemically all the way up to the top of the tree. Why did the CEO allow this to happen? Why did the senior managers allow this to happen? At what point does the governance system allow it to interject and identify these problems and then actually start to provide solutions? Nobody needs to be familiar with this particular organisation, but there's an old people's home in France called Orpea that we've just finished an investigation on. And Orpea, it's effectively like a kind of Bupa type of environment. It provides a franchise of old people's homes across France. Unfortunately, an investigative journalist went inside that organisation and started to see what was going on. They were starving their patients, they were allowing their patients to die, they were sexually abusing their patients, and it was basically just all going unreported. So he wrote a book about this. It became a governmental scandal, and we were put inside the organisation to investigate it. But after our report was generated, there was a little bit of a mea culpa from the senior management, and they go forward and say, well, we wish it hadn't happened. Our system should have identified these problems earlier, managerial liabilities, managerial culpabilities. But that's what compliance and governance systems are meant to identify. How would you stop those problems? How do you stop the human behaviours that happen inside human organisations? And can technology allow us to try to spot those problems before they become significant problems? Any questions so far? I'm really boring myself, but I hope you're following. I'm going to talk a little bit about the technology that's being used.
You mentioned insider fraud. I mean, do you think that actually one of the drivers of cybercrime and that cybercrime is actually insider fraud, or is it more likely to be third parties? Because one would think that that's the opportunity for third parties rather than insiders.
Cyber or fraud generally?
Cyber fraud.
Theft of stuff from a business, typically using cyber methodologies, and statistically it's estimated that 70% of those happen as a result of human failures inside the business. So we catch a lot of hackers, we catch a lot of nation states breaking into pharmaceutical companies because it's lovely to steal their intellectual property and go and manufacture it in the grey market. But 70% of that happens as a result of human failures inside the organisation, not external hackers.
That is the difference between a human failure, that someone made a mistake, and that actually they were involved in it.
It's a combination thereof. I believe it's something like 40% is typically an insider enabled, but it's difficult to discriminate between, in the circumstances of that 65 million that was stolen 3 times from that crypto exchange, did he make a mistake? Or did he allow a mistake to be allowed to happen such that Christian can come in through the back door that he's just allowed somebody to walk through? So human facilitated cyber crime that has resulted in losses. It can be human culpability, but it's basically saying you can put your computer systems in place, you can put AI systems in place, you can put lots of technology around that, but if the human wants to break those walls down, he's going to do it, and he can often allow you to do the majority of the crime that's being affected at the moment. Any other questions at the moment? I'll go on to some technologies. So, talking about some of the things that are happening at the moment. So we're using technology as all of you should be. I made that observation that I've got Teams, I've got WhatsApp, I've got Snapchat, I've got Discord. Obviously you've got old school email, and then people might even write letters still. How many forms of communication have you got in the typical, on a typical day? Personal phones, work phones, all of that stuff is happening at the same time. But typically we are generating material that comes out of our brains and is ejected into the world in some form. So if one could understand what a human behaves like, then how could you detect those anomalies to be able to identify if they are doing naughty things? So again, when we think about the COVID time, I think somebody was talking about this earlier, that if you've got a general manager who refuses to ever take a holiday, then again, it's one of those indicators that he might be a little bit naughty. He doesn't want to take a holiday because he doesn't want anybody to audit his behaviours, go through his books, look at what he's been up to, and so he refuses to ever take a holiday. Again, it's one of those parameters that is used as a potential indicator that makes him look potentially suspicious. So how can we do things like anomaly detection to be able to identify that people are being naughty? You've got things like text analysis, so going through all of the material that they're generating, emails, correspondence. I'll illustrate what this actually looks like momentarily. But obviously, if we're humans doing human things, again, if you think about LIBOR and market manipulation, or if you think about a rogue trader, he's got to create a paper trail, whether that's oral or written, but at some point he's got to create evidence of what he's been doing. I've got some statistics a little bit later, but if we could look at everything in real time, all the time, we should spot every single transgression of our compliance and our governance systems. So our problem is a bandwidth problem. If we could look at everything that had ever been generated, then we should be able to spot every anomaly, so long as our thresholds are appropriate. But that's a human bandwidth problem. We don't have enough time to look at everything everybody ever generates. So how do you catch those problems? We were talking about training a little bit earlier with Christian, and Christian was telling me why his work is so impactful. But an observation, you probably all have to go through those IT training programs which says don't open a PDF, don't open suspicious emails. With all due respect, as a cyber professional, I think that's crap. Right? You are not going to open a PDF that Catherine sends you because you think it's a relevant PDF. So should I fire my secretary if she opens up a PDF that's been received into Grant Thornton for Vijay's attention? That seems massively inappropriate. It's not her job to be an IT expert. It's Grant Thornton's job to be a secure organisation. So effectively, you've got to be thinking about at what level do you catch these anomalies? At what level do you catch the criminality? Is it your job to read everybody's email ever? or can you create governance systems and compliance systems that can preemptively catch these things for you? But again, if you think about platforms like this, if they can automatically identify that somebody's behaving in an anomalous way and bring that to your attention, your single pane of glass, your cockpit is going to be significantly more effective at telling you, go and look at John in the accounting system, I think he's doing something a bit naughty, but Fern is actually all right. So again, these are some techniques that we use, so network analysis, looking at the individual's relationships. Literally, as I was coming over here, we were looking at an individual who works in a private equity organisation, but decided when he was being fired that he was going to steal all of this Salesforce information and take it over to his competitors. Now, this individual was massively unsophisticated and basically broke into the Salesforce system and decided to email it to himself. Now, that's kind of obvious. If we see that there's a Salesforce database being attached to a Yahoo, it seems obvious. But what's the threshold? Where do you get to the sophisticated stuff? How do you catch the sophisticated stuff? So network analysis that's identifying him sending naughty things out of the business should be quite easy to identify. But then you get into automated auditing. So again, doing that in real time, and predictive modeling. So how you can then extrapolate that forward and say, Jonathan normally behaves like this, but suddenly Jonathan's behaving like that. Is that the threshold we should start to investigate? And the technology allows you to get into that place so that you can start to, as an investigator, get ahead of the curve and start to reduce the false positives and identify the red flags more effectively, more efficiently. And again, that kind of goes back to that feedback loop of if you govern better, then failures in governance are less likely to happen, and it improves the quality of the governance inside the organisation. So I think it's a bandwidth problem. We don't have the time to look at every transgression or every potential behavioural anomaly. What if we could? And how can we improve the effectiveness of that? Does that make sense? So this is, again, just one of the mechanisms. This is just a kind of workflow to identify potentially fraudulent transactions, just plants the red stuff. Again, you can kind of see if somebody is always sending, I'm trying to remember there's a mathematical approach called Benford's law. So again, if you numerically distribute all of the transactions that you guys ever make across your financial system, there should be a fairly predictable numerical distribution of the numbers that happen. The number 6 is more common than the number 7, but less common than the number 8. So Benford's law allows you to mathematically map out the distribution of financial flows. But when you do Benford's analysis over your financial records, if you find that somebody's always sending out £23.69 over to this particular bank account, it sticks out. And when we're investigating those types of behaviours, an anomalous distribution, so effectively an irregular pattern of behaviour and irregular pattern of financial workflows means that you can start to spot those problems before they get hidden amongst the other billion transactions that are going on inside your organisation. So using machine learning to look at what normal looks like, baseline your organisation, and this isn't just financial, this is your human behaviours, but baseline what normal looks like and then start to spot those anomalies allows us to identify the suspicious activity before it starts to manifest as you losing £65 million. Does anybody use anything like this at the moment?
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm just interested, using AI to catch fraud patterns, what work has been done to capture patterns across different cultural contexts? Because I'm just conscious that, like, I don't know, financial patterns in the West may look very different to if you're in a context in Africa where they're using mobile money and the financial patterns there. Because what may seem abnormal in one context could be actually totally very normal in another for one of these.
I think in a way you answered your own question there. So baselining what normal is very culturally sensitive. It's effectively very culturally distinct. So again, we were talking about bias, and I'll touch on bias shortly, but effectively if you train every financial anomaly system to be programmed by effectively accounting rules in the West, then as you say, if you go to a Sharia law jurisdiction where their financial flows are different or their lending patterns are different, then this is going to find red flags everywhere. So that's inappropriate. So effectively you baseline it within the organisation itself. So the way you move money around may be very different to the way you move money around inside your organisation, or the authorisation systems of the 2 I's and 4 I's, etc. So effectively what you're trying to do is over a period of time normalise it over what normal looks like in your specific organisation. So what Christian looks like on a good day, what Vijay looks like on a normal day, and then you're trying to find when things are going slightly abnormally. So certainly £65 million going out of the organisation should be spotted, but why was it not? You know, the root cause analysis there is important, but contextualising that around specific jurisdictions is critically important. I think some of us were talking about whistleblowing systems as well. Sorry, Ness.
Yeah, I just to ask whether has is there any data to show how well these AI tools have stopped fraud? Because we hear lots of statistics about the ballooning of fraud and the level of fraud, but where is the data that's showing that the AI is actually succeeding in stopping it?
Hopefully in me. I will be talking about that. Yeah, I will be talking about that. Statistically, I can tell you the mechanisms that are used to commit fraud, and then the tools that can be used to identify it, and then the tools that you put into your hands to be able to investigate it and effectively try to produce instances of it. So there is statistical analysis of this. My slides can certainly be distributed, so welcome to look at all of the footnotes and get the source of the statistics. But effectively what you're trying to do is spot it more so that you can reduce instances of it. And these are just kind of obvious technologies to allow you to be more effective in your role as compliance professionals. Again, it's a bandwidth question. If you could look at everything, you would spot everything. But how can we make sure that there's enough of you to spot everything? So again, if the tools are there to be able to allow you to be more effective and efficient, you would be able to reduce instances of it. I've got some statistics. I think they were already in the slide, but I can't find them immediately. But yeah, thanks. Yeah, some of those on here. So again, I mean, you're talking about the ability to be able to provide efficiencies around being able to spot these problems automatically and then reduce instances of that. So I've got a statistic slightly towards the end, but again, if you look at some of the statistics on here, you're talking about how long it takes you to identify the problem, then it takes you to investigate it and then determine, is it false, is it accurate, is it a real problem? One of the problems that I think we've all kind of alluded to but not quite spoken about is the ballooning volume of information that you all need to look at when you've got to go through an investigation, or effectively your systems need to analyse. Again, that's beyond a human scale problem. A human can typically look at a few hundred documents, maybe a few thousand documents, but when you're generating tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents for every investigation, it becomes quite difficult to scale that up. And so, again, you've got systems like EQS or NAVEX that are going to say, how human addressable is this problem? And if it's above this threshold, yeah, we'll send it over to fresh fields. But if it's below this threshold, we'll just shrug our shoulders and allow it to go on effectively unchecked. And so what's the threshold that allows you to apply human and automatic technologies to be able to spot and interject on these problems and prevent them and catch them before they happen? So the technologies certainly work, but it's a question of making sure that you're using them in the right way. And I think your question is critical. If you come in with some completely desensitized tool that says this is the way compliance is going to happen inside your business, it's highly unlikely to be socially appropriate. It's highly unlikely to be culturally sensitized to your organisation. So how do you do these things and make sure that they actually have an effective impact on your organisation? You've got to make sure that it's appropriate. This is kind of boring, but these are documents. When you've got an investigation, perhaps you're doing a bad lever, perhaps you're doing an internal investigation, you're doing a compliance failure, you've got to look at documents at the moment. How do you guys look at documents at the moment? Do you have any special technologies that allow you to do that? So this is, again, a scale problem. If a document, you've got to look at a contract that perhaps says, I'm going to make sure that my brother-in-law gets a backhand every time he installs ovens in the kitchens and inside a chain of pubs. You've got to spot those problems. How would you spot those? How do you make sure that it's the kind of thing you can spot? And again, we've done those types of investigations. We did a peculiar investigation where a large organisation required a small architecture building, a business, and we identified from contractual review that exactly that was happening. So the brother of the general manager was being given backhanders and he was given inside. So the procurement process was going to be anybody over, the bid is £10,000, it's come in and refit the kitchen, and everybody's got to have a competitive tender. Lo and behold, the brother-in-law was always coming just under the threshold with what was deemed to be the best proposal, so he was always getting the contracts. As a result of that, we identified that obviously it was tender fraud. That was escalated to the SFO. It cost that organisation £10 million to be able to defend itself in front of the SFO for want of £20,000 worth of internal fraud for tenders. So, yeah, this is a major problem. it can go unchecked, except who's going to spot it? Would anybody have actually spotted that unless they were specifically looking for it? So this is a human scale problem. Had you reviewed documents, we use technology to allow you guys as compliance experts or investigators to go through documents significantly more effectively and use technology to allow you to identify the problems in the data set a lot faster than you ever would be able to if you were a human. And there's a statistic I'll show you momentarily, but this is the kind of stuff that frankly, I had to write the law on. So I wrote the English law on the electronic disclosure, so the disclosure of material when you're conducting investigations in the UK courts. And this type of technology is now being mandated. You don't trust a human anymore. I was lecturing to a lot of judges at the start of the year, and a judge came out with a fantastic expression, which was, don't fetishize the skills of a human. So let's not assume that humans are perfect, because they're not. I'm definitely not perfect. So don't assume that a human is perfect. Don't assume the AI, don't assume the technology is perfect, but a combination of the human plus the technology allows us to be able to significantly improve accuracy and effectiveness at being able to do what a human needs to do. So that comment I made at the start, AI won't replace humans, but AI will definitely replace humans that don't use AI. You've got to find a way to be an effective hybrid of those two approaches. This is an AI approach, so effectively bringing it back to what our colleagues have been speaking about. Again, once you've taught the AI what your environment looks like, so what your contracts look like, what your documents look like, what your employees look like, then it can start to analyse your documents and do the investigation for you. Now, I wouldn't trust it to do the investigation for me, but something that is being released effectively as we speak, so in September this year, is the ability for the technology, so it's like a chat GPT that's trained on you, and it will go through, and rather than just saying, this is the keyword fraud or blackmail, nobody sends an email that says, I'm about to sexually abuse Vern. Yeah, that's not the way internal bullying looks like. But the documents, the systems are now trained so that they can understand humans and make recommendations and say, this is why this document is critical to your attention. You need to look at this one. Ignore the other 99%, but this is the one that's relevant, and this is why it's relevant. So kind of going back to those questions about, it understands human behaviour. It's been taught what human behaviour looks like. Critical to your point, this is what kind of human behaviour has been taught on. Is this what it looks like in the West? Is this what it looks like in Qatar? But once it understands what your human behaviours look like, it can tell you, listen, ignore the other 99%. These are the documents you need to look at, and this is why it's relevant to your investigation. This is why this material is the stuff to actually get ahead of, which again kind of goes to that threshold of investigatability. Is this something that you can quite quickly get through? Is this something you need additional support on? Is this the kind of thing that the technology can allow you to understand significantly more effectively? So again, thinking about the scale and the bandwidth problem, if the technology allows you to churn through tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents in real time, and I think that dramatically changes your compliance posture, where if you were looking at everybody's behaviours, everybody's Teams meetings, everybody's messages in real time, if you wanted to, there are GDPR questions about why you might not want to do that, but if you wanted to do that, the technology now allows you to do that. So in real time, you can understand what's going on inside your business, everywhere it's happening. So you had the question, which isn't quite the answer to the question, but in terms of the efficiencies that can apply, we're conscious that it takes a human time to do a human job, but the AI leverage with the human can create significant savings, like a 96% efficiency in being able to understand documents. Whether you trust it, whether it's trained, whether it's accurate, is an iterative process. You need to make sure it's fit for purpose. But it's undeniable that technology can read human-generated material and derive sense from it, significantly accurate than most humans can. And so this is where we're going. And it's kind of like an obvious summary of the kind of use of AI in investigations and compliance. Predictive modelling, so understanding what people are doing at the moment, recognising patterns of behaviour, and then being able to identify when somebody is about to send £5 billion outside the building in a way that seems a little bit anomalous. But that allows you to get into preemptive investigations, so spot problems before they actually happen, spot the anomalies, and understand and how you can then go back and iteratively improve governance inside the business. So it works and it is very effective, but you've got to make sure that you're using it in the right way. I'm actually, so I didn't get your name, unfortunately. So, the first statistic on there is the one that unfortunately has kind of fallen off the slide, but yeah, that says that 60% of businesses report improving adherence to regulatory requirements by using AI-powered compliance solutions. So the first statistic is saying that for organisations that use AI-powered technologies, you get a 60% improvement in adhering to regulatory governance standards. But the other ones are quite interesting. So when you're using AI technology to help with your compliance and investigations, you get a 70% increase, so reduction in time required for you to stay compliant. I mean, obviously, platforms like compliance and the cockpit and EQS allow you to create those dashboards to do those types of things, and you're no doubt using technologies like this. But building this into your whistleblowing systems, building into your compliance and your internal governance processes, allow you to spot a hell of a lot more fraud that is currently going undetected. So again, if you think about the bandwidth problem, this 90% statistic is saying that once you've got the ability to use the AI systems to be able to look at all of your stuff, AI solutions decrease compliance errors by 90%. So again, you can spot compliance and you can improve the adherence to the compliance systems you're building, which allows you to have a 95% increase in monitoring effectiveness and efficiency. You're increasing your ability to be able to look at the naughty stuff that's happening and focus on the 5% that is actually naughty. So it allows you to be a lot more effective at spotting the problems that are actually happening inside the business. Questions on this so far? I'm coming to the end because the food's coming. So, questions so far? So hallucinations. I don't think we've spoken about hallucinations, but nobody's asked about them at the moment. But effectively, hallucinations are an expression for when the AI goes a bit doolally. So when it puts a thumb on the top of your head, when humans know that you shouldn't have a thumb on the top of your head. So effectively, what are the challenges and considerations that go into all of the things that we've heard from my colleagues? What are the things we should be worried about other than Skynet taking over the world? Is stuff like bias, is stuff like, this is all trained in the West, it's trained on American versions of, male-centric, testosterone-driven versions of Reddit and YouTube. So is that the way the rest of the world operates? Very probably not. So again, this is an example of a recent system that was put into place that found that when you were using an AI system to help you recruit people, it was purposely biasing against black and female individuals. Now, obviously that's untenable, that shouldn't be allowed to happen, but it's those kind of unintended consequences. How do we make sure that it is as God-fearing as we are as humans, and that it is sensitized to the world that we have? I'm slightly atheist, but I'm using that as a purposeful example of how do we make sure that it behaves the way we behave culturally. And again, cultural standards are very different. So maybe in the Middle East, this is exactly what you do want, but in the West, maybe it's exactly what you don't want. So how do we get transparency of decision making? How do we make sure that if we're using this type of thing to help us make decisions around governance and investigations, it's actually defensible? So again, the AI can almost certainly do your jobs better than you, but do you trust it to do that? What about when it doesn't? What about when it cocks up? What about when it fires the pregnant, transsexual? How do you make sure that it is actually culturally appropriate and it's actually something that you want to do? So how do we make sure that just because it's attractive from a cost perspective, that it's actually doing what we need to in terms of quality and robustness and from a social perspective? So these are some concerns that we need to worry about. And it gets, I don't wear a tinfoil hat, but it gets slightly more disturbing as well. So anybody familiar with this? Hopefully you are. Cressey's fraud triangle. Oh, yeah. Tell us about it, Catherine. Go on. I'm going to take a breath. Tell us about it. Go on.
No, we use it in our training. Obviously, it's a traditional way of explaining why people commit fraud.
Yeah, exactly right. So Cressey's fraud triangle tells you a little bit about why humans do naughty things, and they take advantage of systems. So, it might be that they're under commercial pressure, it might be that they've rationalised that nobody's going to miss an extra couple of post-it notes if I take them out of the stationery cupboard, or they're not going to miss an extra £5 billion when I take it out and send it over to my mate. Cressey's fraud triangle kind of tells you three of the traditional psychometric parameters that are used to rationalise fraud inside a business. But the human brain is thinking about it, and it's saying, well, it's only me, and it's only a little bit, nobody's going to spot it, I'm super clever, I'm the clever guy that's going to be able to get away with it this time because nobody's ever done this before. But if you could baseline what a human looks like, so if you could baseline what Dan looks like on a normal day or what Jonathan looks like on a normal day, then again, I find reading every one of his emails, if I understand the way he writes, if I understand the way he communicates with his PA or his staff or his suppliers, then I can start to preemptively understand what Jonathan looks like. So we developed this system called psycholinguistic analysis to be able to baseline psychologically what your employees look like, which is a terrible thing to do. But if I know what Catherine looks like on a good day, and then it's coming up to payday, she didn't get her bonus, so she's decided to possibly do something a bit naughty and stick an extra £10,000 on the expense forms. psycholinguistic analysis would allow you to preemptively spot changes in her psychological demeanour and be able to spot that she's likely to commit a crime, so likely to do something naughty before she's actually done it, which allows a compliance professional to go up and say, Catherine, do you need a bit of time off? Do you need a raise? Do you need a little bit of money extra in your bank account? But that gets you into a Minority Report perspective where the technology is now so good at understanding what we're like that it can preemptively understand that you're about to commit a crime. And it allows you, in theory, to be able to preemptively govern people. That's a naughty place to be. And although we're all talking about AI, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act regulations recently come into place because it says that's naughty stuff. We shouldn't be using AI to make decisions like that. To be able to say that if I'm going to manipulate the behaviour of somebody, you really need to regulate that type of AI really well. But those systems exist. Yeah, again, we invented those systems. You're using systems like that in a sanitized way when you're using technology like EQS. But the ability to be able to understand human behaviours better than the human itself does. So Google knows me better than I do. I don't know if you've ever Googled your own profile, not Googled yourself, but what Google knows about you. It's scary what it knows about you. And then you can imagine if you do that on a mass scale, and you can do that over 10,000 employees, you will spot fraud before they actually even know that they want to commit it. And that allows you to potentially interject. Whether or not you should is a problem. Everybody know who this is? Lady Gaga. What's that?
Someone who looks like Lady Gaga.
What's that?
Someone who looks like Lady Gaga.
Yeah, so this was, I think, a Versace campaign a few years ago. So Lady Gaga was my client. And somebody broke into her systems and stole all of her photos, and I got to look at thousands of naked photos of Lady Gaga, which sounds like a good thing, except when you see what Lady Gaga looks like when she's not retouched. And again, all of the AI manipulation that went into that photo, we've become so sanitized. We expect the photos to look like the previous photo. This is what normal looks like to us. But again, this is kind of obvious that the photo's been manipulated once you know that it's been manipulated. But again, as our colleagues were showing, this was me on holiday recently, except it wasn't. So again, this is developed. This was generated by Flux as well. I can't tell this isn't me, but we were recently asked to do an investigation into a pharmaceutical company when people were submitting expenses and saying that I went to dinner with 6 of my colleagues and we went over to Gouger and we all had steak, and there's a £200 invoice that's effectively being gifted back to them from the hospitality register. Except when you do photo analysis of everybody sitting around the table, we can detect that the photo had been manipulated and actually that dinner never happened. So again, this is the kind of thing that is dramatically reducing the barriers to entry to be able to do photo manipulation. Again, I was looking at this one. This is me on holiday. No, it's not. I'm divorced. That's not my wedding ring. But again, you think, that's the kind of thing that can be slightly scary. If that went over to my current wife, then it could get me into trouble. But again, these things are getting so accurate that it's difficult to spot. Apparently that's a female VJ, but again, this is Flux generating 3 of me, or indeed 2 of me sitting next to each other looking quite friendly. Again, the ability to do photo manipulation is getting quite scary. And we're getting into a place where the technology is great. It's probably a little bit too great, but use it to your advantage. Again, this is just my summary, but use the technology to allow you to be better at your jobs, because the bad guys are already using the technology to make sure that they're trying to get ahead of you, but you can use it to your advantage. That's me done. Hopefully you found that helpful, and let's have some food. But